Esther here. Welcome to simplehomeandhearth.com, and I am doing a short introductory video clip on today's main video, which is harvesting honey mushrooms. And as I've said before in one of my other previous videos about something else, I think it was the cream cheese cupcakes, I have written a blog post on how to do this process of canning mushrooms that I've harvested wild down by our creek, and I am going to put a link to my blog post so you can print out the instructions on how to do this. So you can see behind me I am prepping everything. I'm going to have all 4 burners. I've got my canner. Right behind it, I have my lids simmering, hot, I should say. And then behind that, I have, on the other side of the stove, I have water boiling in a kettle. And then in the front, I have my Dutch oven filled with mushrooms. I've already started the process. But before I even get started, I figured I'd better just sit down and have a tableside chat with you. First of all, before you go hunting and foraging for wild mushrooms, do your research. Know what mushrooms you have in your area. Be confident that what you find is indeed edible. There are a lot of lookalikes and, how do you call it? I don't know the word for it, but lookalikes. Teasers, if you will, that look like they might be edible, but they're not. They're very poisonous. So know what you're hunting for, first of all. Number 2, know what it looks like and know that it's edible when you do find it. And number 3, when you harvest mushrooms, don't dig the whole things up by the roots and get rid of all of it. Leave some to spore for the next season. The mushrooms I'm going to talk to you today about are honey mushrooms, and I have the scientific name for them and everything in my blog post. You can click the link down below and read about it. And they are edible, and they are very good, and they are a fall mushroom, not a spring mushroom. It is the very last day of September 2020. Tomorrow is October 1st. And I just harvested them a couple days ago. So let's get into the process. Let's go harvest the mushrooms. I did video clips already, and I'll get ready to show you the process of harvesting them and how to go about cleaning them and cutting them. And now we are finally at the preservation or canning stage. So I hope you enjoy this video, and please click the link down below to like and subscribe, and you'll always get notified when I put up another video. I don't spam people. I put up a video once in a great while, and so you're not going to be bombarded with notifications from Simple Home and Hearth. You just won't. So enjoy the video. Let's get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am walking down the edge of our property toward the trail that goes down into the creek along the road, and I will be harvesting mushrooms. The same spot where I harvested them last year have grown tremendously this year, so I'm getting ready to harvest mushrooms. And I'll turn the camera around and show you. This is honey mushrooms, and the foliage has grown up so much between this year and last year. I actually should have brought my machete, but look at them. Woohoo! I hit the jackpot on honey mushrooms. And there are some more over here. There. And there. Right there. I'm not gonna get those. I'm gonna leave them. And I'm not gonna harvest everything because I want to leave some spores for next year. But this is what I'm gonna harvest this year. Look at all that. So let's get started. Honey mushrooms. Okay, now you see this one has some mold growing on it because it's been so wet this year. And this too, it's got some mold on it. I'm going to throw those back because they're kind of slimy. And there's been so much rain, there's some mold growing on it. I don't want those. I'm going to throw them back so they can spore out and reharvest and regenerate next year. Okay, so I have a few in my bucket. But I don't want to cut all of them off because if I pulled the whole thing up by the roots, then they wouldn't drop their spores and repropagate next year. And I want to save myself the harvest, my little honey hole that nobody else knows about. And if they do know about it, they're afraid to harvest them because they don't know they're edible. And this is our property, so. Okay, well, I didn't get as many as I thought I would. I've only got like a quarter of a bucket here. This is a 5-gallon bucket. I've only got a quarter of a bucket. Although they were all over the place, they were kind of late. And it's crazy because harvesting these, if you don't catch them on a certain day when it's just right, then your window of opportunity for harvest is mere hours, not necessarily days. So, although there were a lot of them around there, I couldn't use them all because it's been so rainy. Some of them were moldy and too far gone. But anyway, I got what I got, and I will show you how I process them. Okay, so I've harvested the mushrooms yesterday, and I just left them in the bucket overnight with the lid on. And right now I have them rinsing in cold water in my sink. It's a quarter of a bucket. And I am going to take each one, and I've already done this one. I'm just wiping it off, rinsing them in water. This is not salt water, it's just cold water. And I take my spray and I make sure to get all of the gunk and little critters or whatever that might be hiding in the folds of the back of the mushroom, and the gills is what you call it. And I'm going to do that to each one of them. And let me get a knife. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to cut the stem off. If there's any stems on it, I'm going to cut them off. Just discard them in the other part of the sink there. And this is a really big one, so I'm going to cut it in half. And you don't need to use much pressure. And then cut it in quarters again. So we have 4. You just want to kind of cut them in quarters. And they'll slice, and then you can just tear them apart. And then I'll show you what I'm doing over here. Can you see me? Okay. Now I am moving them over here to my drying rack on the table, and I'm going to dry them top side down. And that way the gills are exposed. See? There we go. That way the gills are exposed to the air. And I'm just going to arrange them on this drying rack as close as possible. And I put a towel on the table underneath the cooling rack because I don't want water getting on the wood on my table. And I'm just going to keep doing that process, cleaning them. I'm going to just keep cleaning them. I am going to rinse them out, cut them into smaller pieces, and the pieces that are already small, I'm just going to leave them as is. Just make sure the stems are off and the gills are cleaned with the sprayer. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that process going, and I will show you how much I have when it's all over with. So I will be right back. I wanted to show you, I don't really even need to use a knife to cut this. I've washed off the tops, cleaned out the gills, and all you really need to do is put your fingers here in the center and just break it apart like that. It just comes apart, and then from there you can just bend it and it comes apart. Don't really need a knife. I'm just breaking it into smaller chunks because when I can it, I want, of course they'll break down as you cook them, but some of them have already broken up in the bucket. I'm just going to put those on the rack. Yeah, this one's falling apart. And actually, you can see that right there. The middle is like real mushy. If they're a firm mushroom and fresh, they're going to feel like handling a piece of fish. They're going to be very meaty. And this one is like really spongy in the center. So I'm actually not even going to use that mushroom. It's past its prime. Ants and little bugs, even snakes. When I was out there harvesting these yesterday, I found a tiny little baby snake. It was a brown one, big flat head. We have a lot of copperheads around here. I don't know if that's what it was, but it was a little baby one, maybe 4.5 inches long. First I thought it was a worm. But there we go. See? Fleshy part is nice and clear, feels like a piece of fish. This is a beautiful specimen right here. All right, so I just wanted to point that out to you. Don't really have to have a knife, really. Just only to cut the stem off. The mushrooms themselves just kind of break apart and split along the gill line. So, super easy. All right, let me get these done. Okay, this is my last one here. I have a lot of little bits and pieces in the sink, but I'm just going to drain the sink and toss all the little tiny ones that will just fall through the rack because they're just too small. But I wanted to mention one thing here. If you did not want, this video is going to be about canning mushrooms. I'm going to can these. But if you didn't want to can them and you just wanted to dehydrate them, you could either use a dehydrator, which I would not recommend because mushrooms are so full of vitamins and everything, and sometimes if you dehydrate them, it cooks them. Mushrooms dehydrate so easily. I suggest letting them dry with air. And how you would do that is you'd take a needle and a string, a really, really thick string, and you would put the string through the center of the mushroom after you've cut the stem off, and just run a string right through the middle of it, and then take another mushroom, do the same thing until you have a string of mushrooms, and just hang them up and let them dry for, you know, months, several weeks. Keep them in a dry area that's not humid, and that way you retain a lot of your vitamins and antioxidants and stuff that are in mushrooms. So that's what I would do if I were drying these, but I'm not drying them. I'm going to can them up. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and almost a half drying racks full of clean and sectioned mushrooms. From my experience the last couple of years we've been here, these come to fruition in September. Last year they were just abundant the first week of September. This season it was the last week of September. We had a late spring. We had kind of a, you know, pretty late spring, late summer, and we had frost and snow way up until, you know, way past planting season even here in the mountains of West Virginia. But so these mushrooms came to fruition about 3 weeks later than they did last year. But I still was able to get some. I did not catch them when they were at their best. So I don't have as much as I did last year. But anyway, let me take a break here and I will show you what it looks like after they're canned. Okay, this is a small jar that I canned up last autumn of wild honey mushrooms, and they've pretty much kept their shape, but they turned really dark. And these mushrooms have a thickener in them actually. It's almost like a gel, and you can use it to thicken soups and stews and everything else like that. They're really good, and we've been eating on them all year. And this is just one little small jar of the honey mushrooms, and of course I label it with my silver Sharpie. And but they are really, really good, and they're very meaty, and they kind of keep their shape. So that's what they look like after they're canned. Totally different than what they look like fresh, washed, cut up. They're almost white, like a creamy white. But when you can them and cook them, this is how they turn. Really dark. And they're so good. Okay, here it is the next day, and they have been sitting out, the mushrooms, overnight. And you can see they're already starting to turn dark and get a little bit dry. And I don't have to have them dry for processing because they're going to get canned. And it does not matter if they turn dark, because once you process them, they're going to turn practically black. It's just the nature of the honey mushroom. So I just thought I'd show you what they look like after sitting out overnight. Okay, my work day is over, The evening has begun. We've not yet had dinner, but I need to get started on these mushrooms. So, as you can see here, I have my Dutch oven full of mushrooms, and all of them fit in here. I was pretty stoked. Last year I had so many more mushrooms that I had to do like 2 batches, I think. But this is about a little over a gallon of harvested wild honey mushrooms, and that I've let sit out overnight and drain and dry a little bit, and now I'm ready to process them. So I have my Dutch oven full of mushrooms. I have my tea kettle on to boil. I have my lids simmering, which I need to shut the fire off because I don't want to boil them to death. I have my lids simmering, and I have water in my pressure canner, and it's just tepid. And my jars are already clean and sterilized, but they're cold. They're not hot. The water is not hot. If the water were hot and the jars were not hot, I'd go to put everything in there and they would crack and break and split and explode because of thermal shock. So the water is tepid, the jars are room temperature, they're not going to crack, they're not going to break. So my first step after cleaning the mushrooms and cutting them and letting them dry a little bit on the rack, put them in a pot big enough to hold them all, and we are going to be adding kosher salt. We're going to have to boil these in salt water for 5 minutes. That's what I'm going to do now. First step. You need lots of salt. Now I'm going to put water in the pot. I'll be right back. All right, I got my Dutch oven filled with water, and when the mushrooms started to float, I knew I had enough water in the pot. My kettle just finished boiling. I'm going to turn that off for now. Shush. It's loud. And now I'm going to turn this on, get it boiling, and then once it comes to a boil, I'm going to let it go for 5 minutes. Now all we do is wait. I'll talk to you later. Okay, they have finished boiling 5 minutes in salt water, and I am going to now lift them out of the pan with my trusty dusty sifter, skimmer, you know, the thing that I always use in all my videos practically. My favorite tool in the kitchen. I need another one. So if any of you feel generous to send me one of these, I would appreciate it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is, instead of draining them into a big colander, which makes a mess, I'm just going to drain them with this tool that I have and put them in the jars. And we're going to fill the jars to 1 inch from the top. All right, so let's get started. See how dark they've turned? Isn't that cool? Love it. Okay, I've finished filling the jars, and you can see there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half pints. All that work, all that cutting, all that cleaning, all that drying, boiling, I only ended up with 5 half pints of mushrooms. So I can kind of understand why in the store they're a little bit spendy, because they're a lot of work, mushrooms are. For a very small yield, but they are so worth it. Anyway, now the next step after you fill the jars You can see here that I have, like this one is a little bit less than an inch. They're all probably an inch and a half from the top. That's all right. That's about the amount of mushrooms we would use in a recipe anyway. So next thing you want to do, even though you boiled them in salt water, you're going to want to put a half a teaspoon of salt in here because you've drained them. The salt just kills off all of that gunk and stuff that was on the outside of the mushroom, and it kind of saturates the mushroom so it doesn't soak up so much liquid when it processes in the canner. And you want to add a little bit of salt too because salt is flavor and it's also a preservative. So we're going to add a half a teaspoon of salt to each jar, and then we're going to pour our hot just boiled water into the jars before we put them in the canner. All right, so let's get started. And right now I'm taking the handle of the spoon and putting it down in there just to get rid of all of the air bubbles. It's an important process, important step. And the water is now about an inch from the top. And it helps dissolve the salt you just put in there. And it also, getting rid of the air bubbles also helps mix all that salt in with the jars initially. All right, there you have it. Now, of course, as if you know how to can and you've seen my other canning videos, always get my lids over here. Always wipe the rims to make sure there are no cracks. Feel it with your fingers. Clean off the rims so there's no residue or gunk before you put your lids on. And I really hate to use this big pressure canner just for 5 half pints. And I do have some barbecued pork that I'm going to be canning up in pint jars, but they process for such a longer time than the mushrooms have to. I'm just going to have to do one small batch. So, all right. My water has cooled off enough I can reach in there with my fingers and get the lids. That's okay. They're still softened. And now I put the lids on, but I don't tighten them down super tight, as you all know. I've said many times in my other videos. Hand tighten them and then loosen them just a little tiny bit, and you're good. All right, that's all you have it. Now they go into the canner, and we'll get started on this batch. We're going to process them for 40 minutes. And I have my canner filled with about 2.5 inches of water, only because we're going to process them for such a short time. But they still have to be pressure canned because they're low acidity. If they were high acidity, I would be steaming them or water bath canning them. But they're low acidity. And so anyway, I'm gonna spread these apart quite a bit. That's cool. I'm gonna get the pressure canner started and I will be right back. Okay, as I've said in my other videos, when you're pressure canning, you have to, I usually start off cold, depending on what I'm pressure canning. And then I turn the fire on high, bring it up to high heat boiling, and then this plunger, or nipple or plug, whatever you want to call it, will pop up when it's under pressure. And then this is the vent, the steam vent. And I will let that vent freely for 10 minutes. Then I will put the jiggler on it to keep the pressure in the pan. And then I will wait until the pressure gauge comes up to 15 pounds pressure for my elevation. And then and only then will I start the timer for 40 minutes. That's how long you have to pressure can mushrooms. And when all that's done, then I just turn the fire off and walk away. And when it's all cooled, this little pressure gauge or pressure plug will pop back down. The gauge will go back down to 0. I can take off the jiggler, take the cans out of the pressure canner, and put them on top of a towel to dry or to cool off. So anyway, there you have it. Wild harvested honey mushrooms from next to our creek. I'll be back and I'll show you what they look like after they're canned. Okay, the 40 minutes has passed and the mushrooms are finished, and I have my new high heat gloves. I'm no longer using oven mitts. I really like these things. They are rated for 900 plus degrees. So I'm just going to reach in here and pick up my cans using my high heat gloves. There's one. There you go, see? Okay, there is my 5 half pints of wild foraged honey mushrooms. And they're boiling and bubbling up. You can see that. And they actually all sealed in the can. Rings are really loose, which means they've sealed. And I am just going to let them sit for probably till tomorrow morning, and then I can label them and put them away. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.